The only thing more boring than journalists talking about other journalists is when a journalist talks about other journalists talking about other journalists. But hear me out, and you'll see why I'm going to do just that. Maclean's magazine just published this 2,100-word story, huge story called The Angry Radical Right. And the subheadline there is, Why a Growing Number of Extremists Are Lashing Out Publicly at Muslim Immigrants and Justin Trudeau. Wow, sounds nasty and dangerous and huge. Yeah, no, I mean, you read the story and what the author did was sort of laughable. He went to a few public internet comment sites where literally anyone in the world can type a message on a public Facebook group, and Maclean's cherry-picked some people ranting politically. If you've ever been to a newspaper's comment section or a Facebook group or Twitter, or I think the worst of them all are in the YouTube comments, they are nuts of every variety there. That's the internet for you. But Maclean's built a whole story on that. The trouble is the thesis fell apart even on its own terms, because when Maclean's phoned up some of these tough-talking blusterers, they immediately said, no, they're just venting. They're just peaceful guys mouthing off. And one website, realizing how its comments were being construed by Maclean's, actually put up a notice saying they wouldn't tolerate any really mean comments. Now, let me tell you that you could literally write any story in the world if you were basing it on what you could find in an online comment section. I mean, there are billions of online comments of every stripe where people can mouth off. It's sort of like life that way. But here's what gets me, is that this story was carefully crafted to imply that, first of all, this is something new that has only arisen in response to Justin Trudeau and Muslim migrants. And secondly, that this is just a phenomenon on the right. And that finally, that this was the definition of extremism. The article uses the word extremism or extremist 5 times, but never to talk about Muslim migrants or terrorists, only to describe old stock Canadians who are angry about Trudeau. Now, I was interviewed by the Maclean's reporter, Martin Patrichan, for about 90 minutes on this story, and he quotes me fairly and accurately. I pointed out that Canada is massively left-wing in its institutions. Besides Trudeau, 8.5 premiers in Canada are on the left, most of the media, universities, the courts, pop culture, etc. I mean, it's unseemly that the left, which is so dominant, just can't stand a handful of voices on the margins dissenting. But the point that probably made up 3/4 of my lengthy discussion with this reporter, all of which was left on the cutting room floor, was that it's a myth to say that the right has a monopoly on anger or rudeness. In fact, sometimes I wish we were angrier. Anger is a right-wing thing, really? How about this CBC hack?
Help save poor Stassi Steve this season. God knows here Harper doesn't have enough sense to save himself, so let's bring him a load of sense. Yes, if you want change, let's make change. Go to margbringschange.ca, push that virtual penny, and I'll match it with a real penny. And push share on this video, and I'll match that with a real penny, and we'll bring a load of sense, finally, to Mr. Harper, dear leader. Steve-o.
Oh, just comparing Stephen Harper to Hitler, are you? Oh, no big deal. How about this extremist driving around Edmonton with an F Harper sign on his car? He was given a ticket by police for distracting other drivers, of course, but the CBC turned him into a hero for that. Just type the words "Stop Harper" into Google and see not only the thousands of hate blogs, but thousands of hateful rallies screaming the profanity. If you have the stomach, type in the words F-U-C-K Harper into Google and see what vitriol comes up there. So why didn't Maclean's ever do a 2,100-word story on that? I've never seen a conservative call for the assassination of a left-wing prime minister or president, but the Liberal Party itself once published a picture of Stephen Harper being assassinated. In 2006, an entire snuff movie was made about George W. Bush. It won rave reviews at the Toronto Film Festival. I've never seen that sort of thing on the right, never even rhetorically, certainly not with that kind of professionalism and money and official support. Maclean's found a few apologetic blowhards online, though, so give that 2,100 words. But of course, offensive words, rude words, rough words, they're just words. Maclean's used to support that sort of thing. I mean, 10 years ago, Mark Stein wrote a warning essay about Muslim migration on the front page of Maclean's magazine. He wasn't rude at all, of course. Mark Stein is brilliant. But his facts offended some Muslims who then sued him in human rights court, cost the magazine $250,000. Now, back then, Maclean's magazine fought and supported free speech, even offensive speech, and knew that the real extremism in question was that of radical Islam, including its Canadian vanguard. Well, here we are 10 years later, and Maclean's would never fight for free speech like that again. I mean, they've learned their lesson about who they can or can't offend. So a couple months ago, on their Remembrance Day cover, they put a convicted al-Qaeda terrorist on the cover of the magazine, not in an expose of his terrorism, but in a hagiography, a love letter presenting Khadr as a victim alongside two actual rape victims. That's the new Maclean's. They'll put a convicted, confessed Muslim terrorist and murderer on their cover as a hero, but then they'll dig around in comment sections to find the real threat. There are real threats in Canada. As I said in my quote to Maclean's, the likelihood of being killed by Muslim terrorists is very low, although in the last week, 7 Canadians have been killed by Muslim terrorists, 1 in Indonesia and 6 in Africa. But the real threat is political Islam, changing our culture, bringing with it sexism, racism, rape culture, homophobia, Sharia law, and every ancient bigotry that defines Arabia today. To Maclean's, though, that's just too difficult to talk about. And they know that for all of their attempts to puff up the harmless online commenters and some threat, none of them are going to take Maclean's to court, let alone an unfair human rights commission, let alone a bomb threat or a jihad. They're not going to be shot up like Charlie Hebdo. So no. Taking on these cranky conservatives is much safer journalism for Maclean's than, say, writing about the dozen mosques in Canada where actual hate speech, actual calls for murder are made every Friday night in a sermon. Real extremists really preaching hate. But see, Maclean's already learned that if you write about things like that, you get a $250,000 lawsuit and you're called a bigot, and that's not cool. Yeah, no, better make fake paper dragons to bravely go and slay. Leave the heavy lifting to media like us here at The Rebel, which Maclean says, quote, reports extensively and obsessively on the supposed spread and threat of political Islam. Well, yeah, I guess we do. It's tougher work than reporting extensively and obsessively on comments left on obscure Facebook pages, but it's probably a better fit for the dictionary definition of the word journalism than giving a tongue bath to Omar Khadr. Don't you think? For the Rebel.media, I'm Ezra Levance.